What is the difference between a hard game that gets a player fired up, excited to face a challenge head on, versus a hard game that just pisses everyone off, resulting in a rage quit where they never return? The original NES TMNT absolutely walks that fine line. But where does it fall, really? Once upon a time, anything brandishing that TMNT logo, which, let's be real, was just about everything, could do no wrong. And despite its reputation today, that included this game. But as time moved on and kids grew up, those rose-tinted glasses stopped fitting so snugly, and the flaws started to shine through. And with the rise of the internet, so came the influx of opinions and horror stories. And the ideas of brutal difficulty and unfair gameplay became synonymous with the title. But again, it wasn't always that way, and it's easy to see why. Released in 1989 by Ultra Games, which was basically just Konami trying to be sneaky so they could get around Nintendo's 10 games per company a year release limit that was in effect at the time. Yeah, can you really believe that was a thing once? TMNT had, and still has, the makings of a great action-adventure game. The music is outstanding, not even remotely hindered by the lack of a classic theme song, because what it does have is upbeat and catchy as hell. Even decades later, the overworld theme still gets stuck in my head, like gooey mozzarella. And the graphics have clearly studied in the art of ninja. Non-conspicuous on the outside, but beneath the veil lies a genuine threat. They are certainly eye-catching, especially for the time, and they really push the NES to its limits, with multiple high-detailed environments and some pretty nice character sprites. The game looks good, but behind that mask is where we start to see the flaws appear. First off, let's talk about the controversial part, the enemies. Bosses aside, the enemies in TMNT feel like they're out of place. Like, why is Jason Voorhees and Megaman trying to kill the Ninja Turtles? But I mean, like, Jason Voorhees tries to kill everyone, so whatever. Honestly, I think it's moot. But I do have an idea as of why, and expectations can influence opinion, so here's what I think. While most TMNT products of the era were based around the 1980s cartoon, if we take a look at the game cover side by side with the comic cover, I think you'll start to see a clearer picture. The original comics were much more brutal than their kid-friendly counterparts, and odds are that the game was originally based around that iteration, which definitely helps explain the difficulty a bit too, as it was clearly meant for older audiences. And you need tougher foes for a tougher game. Okay, that makes sense, but Rocksteady, Bebop, and the Technodrome aren't in the original comics. So odds are that mid-development, changes were mandated to ensure that it more closely matched the more successful product, aka the cartoon. Though whether that's the case or not, I mean, it's really all speculation on my part, it doesn't make up for the graphics' much larger, more impactful issue. The flickering and the slowdown. Yeah, that's right, this game has got it bad, like all over the place. Clearly, the NES is unable to handle all that bodacious turtly goodness, the results of which are a pain in the shell. I think I can just let this scene speak for itself. And while it rarely gets this bad, and honestly it isn't really a deal breaker, the fact remains that anything that leads to cheap deaths will probably piss off any player, and this game has its fair share of them.
New record!
For those of you who have never played this one, TMNT is an action platformer, but it is far from the traditional linear games that most of us are accustomed to, like Power Rangers, Altered Beast, or even other TMNT games, as this game adds explorative elements. And while it's absolutely true that I was making fun of that cheap death right at the start of the game, which is still pretty lame, realistically, it's probably there to force players down into the first sewer to help them understand how environments in this game actually work. And this is
easily one of the game's strongest suits, but it can also work against it. It's how it's implemented that separates the boys from the turtles.
Boy.
Basically, as you traverse the game, you go into sewers and buildings where all the fighting and platforming takes place in order to progress and accomplish objectives, like finding power-ups, missiles to get through obstacles, fighting bosses, and of course, it wouldn't be a classic TMNT game without...
First, we've got to save April.
We save April at least once a day.
But here's the thing, just because you can go somewhere doesn't mean you have to, or that you should. The first sewer you pass through comes out right next to a building that you do not need to go into. All it has at the end is a full pizza, aka full health. And sure, it's completely worth the danger IRL, but here, since enemies respawn on your way back, odds are you'll end up just losing whatever it is you gained. And a lot of areas are like that. Now, that may seem like a downside, but I'd argue that it adds a bit of strategy to the game, since learning the fastest and most efficient path to the end is a test of skill. And at minimum, it offers up some replayability, if nothing else. Plus, if you're lucky, you might stumble upon a captured turtle that you lost earlier. But the turtles themselves, let's finish up by talking about them. Definitely one of the more interesting mechanics in this game are the turtles themselves. At any point, you can pause and switch into any turtle, similar to swapping power-ups in Megaman, and each turtle has his own life bar. So basically, each turtle acts as a life that you can switch between to prevent death. So it's actually more like having all 4 lives at once. The downside is, though, that if a turtle should fall, then you're all booted back to the outside of the overworld. And unfortunately, not all turtles are created equally. Donnie, the turtle with the blunt stick, can basically just one-shot most enemies throughout the game. And if not, at least has the range to take them out before they become much of a threat. Where the other turtles, including the ones with the blades, don't really have those luxuries, usually being stuck with one or the other, and thus much more prone to enemy attacks. Pro tip, equipping power-ups on short-range turtles will drastically up their viability. I recommend the boomerang, since if you catch it, it restores the ammo. Because a lot of the foes, they don't just sit there and take it. They keep coming at you as if nothing happened. But for the turtles with the weaker power or shorter range, it basically means hit after hit. And since you get knocked back when you're hit, it's easy to find yourself taking lots and lots of unfair damage. And towards the end of the game, enemies have so much HP that it's kind of better to just bypass them altogether. And while this may seem like a minor issue, as you can work around some of these problems by, say, cheesing the respawning pizzas in some areas, the fact is that it slowly shaves away any and all goodwill the player might have had for the game, as the cheap hits really do start to rack up. Like, how am I supposed to dodge an enemy at the top of a ladder while it's moving to the next screen? And I think everyone and anyone who's been on the internet knows about the electric seaweed BS in the Save the Dam stage. And don't even get me started on the cheap jumps and respawning enemies in this game. Moving the screen back just the slightest bit to dodge an attack can easily cause enemies to respawn. And I swear, they spawn in some of the cheapest spots possible, basically guaranteeing you'll fall to your death. Or at minimum, you'll have to retread the same area again and again. It's this crap right here that makes it easy to see why this game has gotten such a negative reputation over the years. But the truth is, I really do like what they tried to do with this game, with the exploration, figuring out the right path to take, and some of the more interesting strategy hidden beneath the surface, and just how different it feels for most action platformers. But all of that, it kind of ends up getting shortchanged by the sheer frustration that many cheap moments bring. It really does just undermine the game overall. I think TMNT on the NES gets a much worse rap than it actually deserves. Because despite the slowdown and flickering, the game still looks great. It sounds great, it controls well, has interesting ideas, and despite itself is still pretty iconic. But the truth is that it's just overly frustrating and leans towards being cheap more than fun, and there's just no getting around that. If you want to try this one for yourself, you're gonna have to either emulate or get yourself a physical copy, as it isn't available anywhere else. But be warned, this game is not for casual gamers or even TMNT fans. This one is recommended exclusively for hardcore retro fans only, and masochists.